All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and we're just trialling out a new... Does that sound a bit too loud, or Lynn? Lynn would be my mark of the perfection of the sound. Turn your hearing aids up a little there. I'll just put it down about there. Does that sound okay? Sandy, you can hear that? John, all good? But apparently when I walk away from microphone, you can still hear me here, but this is being taped and put onto a website, so they can't hear me so much, so now they can hear me all the time, which is good. Well, thank you very much for braving the heat. Oh, goodness me, it's not quite the heat wave that we had 5 years ago, I think it was. And I think we all remember that one in March. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a mighty hot March, that's for sure. But still, it has been hot. I think they've said 10 days over 30 degrees, which makes it an official heat wave, I think. But nonetheless, we're very thankful that you were able to brave the warm. I came here this afternoon and turned the air conditioner on, so anyone that got here first would have noticed that it was on. It hasn't been on all weekend. It was just on this afternoon because it was pretty warm in here, so it's quite reasonable. All right, well, we're going to continue tonight with what I find is a really fascinating subject. This is going to lead us into something we can all be a little bit more familiar with, because we're no longer now talking too much of the past, although we will be a little bit. We're not going back into centuries of time. We're not going back into thousands of years, even though we saw, and we'll do a rapid review in a minute, what we did see in our last seminar or so. We're going to be talking about a nation that every one of us knows about. And there's no secret as to why we know all about this nation we're going to be dealing with tonight. But first of all, let's just do a rapid review. I think it's very important that we do a bit of a summary as a bit of a springboard into tonight's talk, and we want to just make sure that we can try and gather our thoughts as to what we have been dealing with, and then keep them always locked up in here, because everything fits together. When you deal with Bible prophecy, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's like putting a little piece over here and a little piece over there, and you think, well, where's this going? You pick up another piece, where does that fit? And it fits here. Then all of a sudden you start seeing this picture developing, and it's exactly in line with what God said would happen and what his whole ultimate plan and purpose is. So last week, of course, we dealt with that little stone, that stone that was cut out of mountain without hands, meaning that this whole scenario of this idea of this stone power is something that is not human intervention. It's not mankind being involved in this. This is something that is going to be divinely ordained. And of course, the fact that it was cut out without hands means that God is behind this particular intervention into that dream that we saw of Nebuchadnezzar's image. And of course that stone power was going to strike at the feet. And we learnt last week, if you remember, that the feet representing iron and clay is an unstable European situation, and we cannot get any more unstable as far as Europe is concerned today than 2013 has been for the last couple of years, but particularly the last 12 months. Goodness me, and I think it's going to get continually more unstable as we progress along, particularly financially speaking. Extraordinarily unstable place is Europe at the moment. And God said through Daniel to the king, the greatest powerful person on the planet at that particular time, King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel said this: "The dream is certain," he said to the king, "and the interpretation is absolutely sure." You can be guaranteed that everything that I've told you about this dream, because God's told me, is going to come to pass. We, of course, can look back and we can see all of that image power. We can see all of that image and what it represented, and we can say it's happened exactly as God decreed it would happen. The only thing we're waiting for is the last part of the vision of that dream to come to pass, and that's the stone power. So I guess we're going to ask the who, the why, the when, the where. When is all this going to happen? What's it mean to you and me? What's going to happen in the world in which we live today? How long away are we from seeing that stone power being revealed to this earth, and so on? Well, that's where we have to come into now, looking a bit more closely, refining our understanding of Bible prophecy, and have a look at Israel. You can't avoid Israel in Bible prophecy. In fact, there are more prophecies concerning the nation of Israel than any other nation on the planet. Now that shouldn't surprise us, because this whole book is a book that revolves around Israel. It revolves around the Jews. It revolves around that tiny little nation that we know as Israel, situated, it just happens to be the centre of the earth, right there in the Middle East. We're going to learn some fascinating things about Israel. It's a tiny dot on the world's surface. Question: why does Israel dominate world politics, world media? And we're going to have a look at that in a moment and show you why that is the case. Why is it that 7 million people seem to dominate the world press, seem to dominate what's going on in the world today? Why is that? It's a question you've got to ask, and it wouldn't be a week go by where you don't read or hear or know something about the nation of Israel. Why does it dominate world news? We're going to have a look at Isaiah 43. I would say is one of the most pertinent and amazing statements in the Bible that I'm definitely... I forgot, we haven't got the colour in pencils again, Nath. Sorry. We definitely got to colour in this particular quotation in Isaiah 43. We're going to talk about a couple of other things there as well. So I want us all to really be engaged in tonight's discussion. I want you to you might have to put your thinking caps on a little bit. Is that locked, is it? First time I've ever known that door to be locked, being an exit door. If there's a fire, don't go downstairs because you won't be able to, the door's locked. So we want to show you how Israel is living evidence that the Bible is true. Now I've got to tell you this, that if ever there's a time in my life where I need to be boosted in my faith, you know, people say, oh look, you know, you go out and have a look at creation, you look at some of the most amazing creatures on the planet, including of course mankind, and our own makeup and how we've been made and the ability that mankind has and everything about our own makeup. And then you go out and you look at some of the other creatures and all these little, you know, I think David Attenborough, who unfortunately is an evolutionist, but when you look at some of those films he's been able to put together and some of that camera work of those amazing creatures, you've got to believe truly that there's a divine architect. But some people say, well, I'm not so convinced. I'm not sure. Grab some pencils there, John. Just grab any colour you want. And just hand them out there. Good on you, Nath. Just grab a colour in pencil and get you a colour in something in a minute. I can go to the creation and look at all these natural wonders of the world and look at the scenery and look at how the globe is the only planet that's found in the whole universe to date, even with the Hubble telescope that has life on it. We can do all of these amazing little searches as far as trying to boost our faith is concerned. But I have to tell you this, there is nothing in this world more that boosts my faith that this Bible is real than looking at the nation of Israel. You cannot go past the nation of Israel for proving that there is a God. Now here's the quote I want you to look up. Very important quote in Isaiah 43. What I want you to do is turn to that page 608 in your Bibles, and I'm going to get you to colour verses Isaiah 43 verses 9 to 12. Now let me just read that to you. You open it up and we'll follow this together because this is an extremely important quotation. Isaiah 43, and I'll just explain what God is doing in this particular verse. He's holding out a challenge, all right? He's sick and tired of all the other nations around Israel, the Philistines, the Syrians, the Moabites and all the other nations, the Egyptians. You know, he's sick of all those nations spruiking forth that they have a God that is all-powerful. You know, the Philistines. Anyone know what the name of the Philistines' God was? What was that, Ben? Dagon. That's right. So the Philistines would promote their god of stone as being a god to be relied upon. And the Egyptians would have all sorts of gods. They had a multitude of different gods, you know. The sun, the frogs, the snakes, they had all sorts of different gods that they worshipped, the cows and so on and so forth. And the Moabites had theirs and the Assyrians had theirs. God said, I've had enough of all you guys. You bring to the table your God and let you prove that your God is real. So he holds out a challenge. So that's what we're going to read in Isaiah 43, verses 9 onwards. We read this. Let all the nations be gathered together. Let the people be assembled. Who among them can declare this and show us former things? Let them bring forth their witnesses. This is God speaking, that they may be justified, or let them hear and say, it is truth. Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. Even I am the Lord, and beside me there is no Saviour. I have declared, I have saved, I have showed, when there was no strange God among you. Therefore ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, that I am God. Now let me explain in a nutshell what he's done. He said, righto, all you nations, come on, bring your witnesses to the table. Bring your proof that your gods are to be relied upon. Well, there's a deathly silence. None of the nations respond. Nobody says anything because they can't bring their wood and stone, their silly-looking snake gods and gods of stone and wood. They bring them there and they're just idols. They're nothing more than just crazy idols just sitting there. And God says, well, I can't hear, I can't see your proof. And then he says, it's my turn. And what he does, he talks about Israel. He says, Israel are my witnesses. So what he's doing, he says, right, everybody, watch this. I'm bringing forward my people Israel. I'm putting them in the witness box, if you like. You can challenge this as much as you like. I want you to look at Israel, and I want you to see, when you look at Israel, you will see me in action, in their life as a nation, in their life throughout their history, that I am God. There is none other but me. And Israel are going to be my witnesses that I exist. So that's an amazing statement from God. I think what we need to do is put it to the test. He wants us to. He really wants us to put his statement in Isaiah 43 verses 9 to 12 to the test. And we need to challenge that statement. And God wants us to. And we're going to challenge this quite rigorously tonight and a little bit next week as well. And just see whether or not we can walk out of this door saying, you know what, there is something pretty amazing about that country, about that nation, about their background, and about their present day, and of course, as we're going to learn, about their future. So Israel figures very prominently in Bible prophecy. By the way, at any time during the night, if you've got a question, don't hesitate. Just yell it out or put your hand up or whatever. It doesn't matter what the question is. I'll do my best to answer it. All right? And if I can't answer it all in the session that we're doing, because of time constrictions, I'll definitely try and answer it over supper. So please, if there's something that worries you and think, what did you just say? I can't quite understand what you're saying. That's good. That's a learning curve. We're here to try and make it as easy for you as possible to follow. All right, let's put this to the test. Some of you have seen this before, but I'll do it again anyway because I need you to understand the relative size of Israel to Australia. There's a map of Australia. It's a bit disappointing that we've got this new map apparently out at the moment that's trying to put South Australia on the map, and they've left off poor old Tasmania. Apparently doesn't exist in the new map of Australia. But anyway, that's nothing to do with me, except of course what we want to do here is just see in contrast how big Israel is to how big Australia is. So I'm going to put three maps up here of Israel. That's the shape of Israel we've drawn, and we're going to try and see if we can pick up which we think is the size of Israel. Who thinks it's... Put your hand up. There's no prizes for getting it right or wrong, but just out of curiosity, who reckons it's number one? Jackson, you reckon number one? Anyone else? All right. Who thinks number two? Well, if you don't put your hands up, I'll know that you're not even thinking about what I'm saying. Who thinks it's number three? Righto, all of you. Righto. Number 3, eh? All right. Well, guess what? It's definitely not number 1 and it's not number 2. 3. How come no one put their hand up for number 2? You know why? Because actually none of them are right. There's Israel. That's how big Israel is to the size of Australia. Israel fits into Australia 367 times. Israel, as the centre of world politics, appears in the media 50 times more than any other country in the world per head of population. Now, they've already done analysis of this. Journalists worldwide will tell you categorically that there wouldn't be probably a paper in the world somewhere in a nation that doesn't have Israel figuring fairly prominently in it across the world, around the world. Of course, you're going to get USA in there as well, but for head of population, Israel figures 50 times more than any other country on the planet. Of 7 million people, that's an amazing credential to have. Why is that? Well, the reason is, of course, we just read it really in Isaiah 43. You're my witnesses, saith the Lord, that I am God. So if God puts his witness in the witness box, and he wants everybody to be focused on his proof that he exists, you would have to expect that Israel is going to be pretty well in the news all the time. And they have been, ever since they've been a nation, and even prior to that, even though they weren't known as Israel, they were scattered Jews all over the world, the Jews themselves have always been at the centre of politics and at the centre of the news. It's quite amazing. But it's not by coincidence. Now, I'm going to ask questions, yell out the answer. Who was the person that led the children of Israel out of Egypt? Louder. Well done. You all knew that, didn't you? Moses. All right. I'm sure you've seen, what's the film called, Ross? 10 Commandments? 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston. Sure, he was Moses in the 10 Commandments. We probably all saw it. I saw it as a kid. I think it was made in 1956. It was one of the old Cecil B. DeMille films that was, years ahead of its time when it was first came out, because they parted the water and they never had no computer graphics in those days. But of course, we all can identify and know something about Moses. Even if you don't know anything about the Bible, you've probably heard of Moses, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt. Does anyone know what the first miracle was, if you like, or the first introduction that Moses ever had to the God of Israel? Because you know that he was, even though the background of Moses, of course, was that he was sheltered by his parents by putting him in the little wicker basket and floated down the Nile, and we know that God intervened in Moses' life and in the whole family's life and allowed Moses to be drawn out. That's what his name means, Moses, to be drawn out of the Nile. Just happened to be the princess of Egypt that drew him out and adopted him as their own son. But he grew up really with Hebrew blood, but as an Egyptian. First 40 years. Then, of course, he had an altercation because he saw one of his own Egyptian soldiers, getting stuck into a Hebrew slave, and he killed him and hid his body, and then didn't turn out real well for Moses, so he fled. And for the next 40 years, he was basically a herdsman down in the wilderness, in the desert. Towards the end of that 40 years, he was introduced to God in a very amazing way. Does anyone know what he saw and what it was? Now, you've answered one, Jackson. Any idea? John? Well done, John. Exactly. He was introduced to a burning bush. Now, I don't know whether you've heard this story or not, but if I was the God of the universe and I had created the heavens and the earth, which we believe God did, and I was in control of everything that happens in this universe, and I wanted to demonstrate to Moses that I am his God, the God of the Jews, the God of the Israelites. If I wanted to demonstrate how powerful I was, I don't think I'd choose that as a miracle. It was nothing overly powerful about what Moses saw. Because what he basically saw was this. He saw a bush that was burning, but it never burnt, so it stayed green. Now, God could have shaken the whole area with a great earthquake. He could have flattened mountains nearby. He could have opened up the desert and created a river and said, Moses, you're dealing with me. Look at what I've just been able to do. But what does he do? He gets a little shrub, a little bush. He sets fire to it with his invisible hand. And next thing, this green bush is on fire and Moses is looking at it and he's thinking, what's that all about? You know, what is that all about? And God is not necessarily showing him some great mighty power that he has. He's showing him a principle and a lesson here of what Moses was going to become. He was going to become a leader of what that bush represented. So what he saw was a bush which represented Israel. Now in Scripture we know that flame represents trial, and I'll give you some quotes for that in a moment. Flame, the fiery flames of trial, of suffering, of persecution, of tribulation, that's all represented in fire. So if you've got a bush here that's on fire, it's burning like you wouldn't believe, the heat is intense, but the more Moses looked, the more he saw, this thing's not burning at all, it's staying green. But I can feel the heat of that. Heat is so intense, it's almost unbearable, but why is it staying green? Well, a couple of quotations there. One of them is from Isaiah 43, so if you've still got it open, it'll be in verse 2. The whole scenario of what you're seeing here, and God is trying to present to Moses and to you and me, and to anyone that really wants to read the Bible for themselves, is that I have called out a special people through Abraham. I've called them out. They are going to be a people that throughout their history will be persecuted from pillar to post. They will have the flames of trial upon them from this day onwards right up till today, but they will never, ever, ever be put out of existence. Ever. You can be guaranteed of it. Just as you saw that bush with that flame kindling upon it, that's Israel, and it will never be put out of existence. Try as people might, and there's been many, many attempts, 10 at least, to try and exterminate the Jewish people, the latest of which, of course, the major one was Nazi Germany in the Second World War, and of course the Arabs have tried on 5 different occasions since the Second World War to exterminate the Jews. There's possibly going to be, well, we know not possibly, there will be another attempt soon, which we'll talk about in subsequent classes, trying to put the Jews out of existence. They've never been put out of existence. Because what Moses saw was a prophecy. It was a prophecy that he saw with his own eyes. It wasn't just read to him. He saw this bush that did not get put out of existence. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore ye sons of Jacob, talking about Israel, are not consumed. Yes, the fire will be upon you. Your identity throughout history will be synonymous with trials and persecutions, but you'll never be put out of existence. When thou, Israel, walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon you. Oh, they'll feel the effects of the flame, but they will not be consumed. They will not be burnt up. So I find that interesting. That's just a little stepping stone as we now lead ourselves into this fascinating subject about Israel. Now, this is just a few quotes. I'm not going to have time to look these up, but you can write them down. Fire in Scripture is often used as a trial and judgment. So Israel was always going to go throughout their history with this persecution and this fiery trials upon them. You know, you can go throughout Israel's history and you can find very little time where they enjoyed peace. And I'm talking biblically, and even since they've been a nation. You know, the day after they became a nation in 1948, they had to face a war with the Arab nations. The Arab neighbours, the day after they became a nation in 1948, and they've been fighting wars ever since. The persecution, the flame, the trials have been upon Israel. Though that in itself is a little testimony that God is in control of the destiny of Israel, and he's putting them on the world platform for you and me and anybody else that wants to take the time to look to say, guess what, there's got to be something pretty amazing behind this nation of Israel for all this to happen as it has been explained in the Bible, and of course we know that is true. So there's been no other nation on the planet that has ever endured persecution like the Jewish people. No, none, ever. Sure, there's been nations that have been persecuted. Some say, what about in Rwanda? You know, which one was the major? The Tutsis and the... Yeah, I mean, what about them? One incident in history. And you can go and look down through time and you will see there have been nations that have been persecuted. The Spanish Inquisition, which, by the way, was also outpoured on the Jews as well. You can go down through history, you can see these nations that were persecuted, but nobody ever in the history of mankind has ever endured the amount of persecution as the Jewish race. Whether they were constituted as a nation or whether they were just scattered members of the Jewish race throughout Europe and Africa and other parts of the world, they have always been singled out for persecution because they're different. So that's a stepping stone. That's laying the foundation for what we want to talk about now. I hope you did your homework. Can anyone remember what I asked you to do? John does, because he told me he's done it. We'll read Ezekiel chapter 37. Because Ezekiel chapter 37 is an amazing prophecy that does leave you breathless when you start to open it up and consider how accurate it was. Ezekiel lived in a time 2,500 years ago. He's regarded as a major prophet in the Old Testament, and he makes these, or he doesn't, God does through him, these most wonderful and amazing prophecies concerning Israel and concerning today, and as you're going to see next week, concerning what's going to happen in the very near future. So this is all about Israel. Ezekiel 37. Now let's open it up, page 715 of your Bibles. And we don't have time to really go through this in a step-by-step detail, because I was kind of hoping that you had done this for your homework, that you did read Ezekiel 37 and you did start to see the general overall picture. What I'm going to do is give you a very quick précis, a very quick summary of Ezekiel 37. It's quite amazing. God gets hold of Ezekiel and he says, right, Ezekiel, come with me, I'm going to give you the most amazing vision that you've ever seen. And at that time, of course, he went on to see some very amazing things from God. But he takes Ezekiel in vision and he stands him right on the edge of this great valley, the most driest, dustiest valley you could think of. And Ezekiel's looking out there, and everywhere from in his peripheral vision, 180 degree peripheral vision, all he can see is skeletal bones, skulls, arms, legs, spines, kneecaps, you name it, scattered everywhere. The whole valley is just totally and absolutely full of bones. And he's looking at them and he's thinking, what is God trying to show me here? This is amazing. What's this all about? And God says to him, Ezekiel, do you reckon these bones could live? And Ezekiel goes, well, you would know, God, but I'm looking at them and I can't imagine them living. But he said, you would know. He says, watch this. And all of a sudden, as Ezekiel's watching, there's a noise, there's a shaking, things are happening in step-by-step progression. And all of a sudden, the skull comes sliding across the sand in this way, and the spine comes from that way, and over there comes a couple of legs, and over here comes a couple of arms and the hips and everything, and it all forms this skeleton right in front of him. And it's not just one skeleton, it's 2, 4, 10,000, 2,000, 3,000, 100,000. They're all getting put together right in front of his very eyes, and he's looking at it and going, wow! I mean, you thought Nebuchadnezzar's image was pretty amazing. This is just amazing to Ezekiel. He's going, what is all this about? Then all of a sudden, if that's not enough, he's got a whole valley of skeletons in front of him. The next thing, where the joins of the skeletons, there's sinew starting to develop. This is the opposite to a decaying body. This is a body being resurrected. There's sinew starting to develop. Then there's some muscle starting to form. Then there's a little bit of the muscle system up the arms and the legs and around the neck and everything. And all of a sudden there's flesh coming onto this skeleton. And all of a sudden skin coming on the skeleton. And then all of a sudden they're no longer just skeletons. They're bodies laying on the ground. And Ezekiel's looking at all this and he's thinking, what next? Next thing, there's a great whoosh, and this breath comes from heaven and goes down into these bodies that are on the ground, and next thing they stand up, right? And they're right standing there, and they become a very exceeding great powerful army. Now Ezekiel's thinking, what is that all about? This is what it's all about. This is quite amazing, because the overview of Ezekiel chapter 37 is simply this. This is a history of Israel, made 2,500 years ago, fulfilled less than 70 years ago. This is an amazing Bible prophecy. Now here's the secret to unlocking Bible prophecy. You've got to pick up what it says in Ezekiel chapter 37. Right at the very beginning it says, chapter 37, he took me down to the valley which was full of bones. And at the end of verse 2, Ezekiel made a comment, these were very dry bones. Now who wants to give me an idea of what that means, very dry bones? What would that sort of basically mean to you? They were very dry bones. Dead for a long time. Exactly. They'd been in this position for an awful long time. When they're dry, this is not a fresh corpse. This is one that has been dead for a long time. Does anyone know the last time Israel was a nation? Do you know how long ago it was? I'm not talking about current nation. I'm talking previous to 1948. Does anyone know their last year of operation as a nation? AD 70. Pretty good, Caleb. Very good. AD 70. Does anyone know what happened to them in AD 70? Anyone want to have a guess? Sandy? Well done. Exactly. Sandy got it right. Well done. The Romans decimated. The Romans had had an absolute enough of the Jews. They couldn't stand them any longer. They were a thorn in the side of the Roman Empire. Rome had taken control of Israel. Israel still had their own semi-government, particularly through their religious leaders. But it was still overseen by the Roman government, and that's why they had Pontius Pilate there, who was meant to be in charge at the time of Christ. But of course, as time went on, the Jews continually frustrated the Romans, until in the end the Romans said, enough's enough, we've had it with you Jews, we're coming down there and we're going to get rid of your city and we're going to get rid of you guys once and for all. And they did. They came down, they laid siege to Jerusalem. 2.5 years they laid siege to Jerusalem. Over 1 million Jews were killed. Shocking, absolutely dreadful siege of Jerusalem. Terrible. You can read it in Josephus. They finally got Jerusalem and destroyed it. And it took, the subsequent decades to finally destroy Jerusalem. But in the meantime, when the Romans had decimated the whole of Judea, as it was known then, really the last time Israel was known as a constituted nation, the Romans said, that's it, let's send the Jews to all parts of the Roman Empire. Some went to Africa, many of them got taken back into Rome and into Europe, many of them got taken across into Asia Minor, and Israel ceased to be a nation. And they ceased to be a nation for an awful long time, until God said, right, I'm bringing you back as a nation. I'm going to resurrect you all again to bring you back. So this valley of dry bones, a very, very good description of Israel having been not constituted as a nation but scattered as people all over the face of the globe. God says, no, I'm bringing you back into the land. So Ezekiel 47 is all about that. It's all about that. So we're going to see this remarkable restoration, the revival of Israel prophesied 2,500 years ago, and the accuracy upon which it occurred. So we've got a process of what happens in Ezekiel 37. And the process is pretty straightforward. There's very dry bones. Next thing there is a skeleton. Next thing it says Ezekiel heard a noise. Then he felt shaking. Then sinews start to be formed onto the skeleton. Then flesh comes onto the skeleton. Then skin comes onto the skeleton. Slowly but surely, in a progressive way, starting to form into this human being. This skeleton's no longer dead because finally there's breath in it and it becomes an exceeding great army. So that's the prophecy made 2,500 years ago about Israel. Well, what do we know about this valley of dry bones? What can we see and really understand in Ezekiel chapter 37 about this valley of dry bones? Well, we've already said it was a long time in captivity. Jackson, you good at maths? AD 70 to 1948. How many years? That's pretty hard, isn't it? I've got to work it out. Oh, he's got his finger up. Just roughly. You've got a calculator, have you? What you've got to do is you've got to do 1,948 and take 70. And I reckon that would be around about 1,880. We'll stick to near numbers. So we're talking 1,800 and nearly 80 years that Israel are desolate, dry, barren, no longer a nation. That's a long time. Plenty long enough for a skeleton to get very dry and dusty and just lay in these valleys. God says, well, hang on a second, Ezekiel. Can these bones live? Do you reckon I can bring them all back again? Do you reckon I can reconstitute them as a nation again? And Ezekiel says, well, you know, God, you're in control. I'm sure you can do it. And, well, he does. Can these bones live, he says to Ezekiel. Who are the bones? By the way, I'm not making this. Who are the bones? Well, it says in verse 1. I think I've got it on the screen anyway for you. Who are these bones? Well, ye are my witnesses, and the bones are the house of Israel. In fact, if we go through this verse, and we'll get to it in a moment, I'll spend a little bit of time on it because we need to understand this whole chapter here is all about the nation of Israel. Verse 11, that's the one I'm looking for. Then he said unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried, our hope is lost, we are cut off from our parts. We're separated all over the world, particularly in Europe, where Rome, of course, had its headquarters, and much of Jewry, of the Israelites, were taken back to Europe and just sold off as slaves, but they survived. They remember the burning bush. They were persecuted for sure, but they never lost their culture, never lost their beliefs, never lost any of those things, and they stayed there. Language, very good. That's exactly right. And they never lost any of that. Very strange for that to happen, but it did happen. And of course God says, well, I'll get you back into the land. So when we come back to this particular process that God shows in Ezekiel 37, you know, we can actually almost put dates alongside each of those processes. This is how interesting this all is, because when you look at it, we got very dry bones. So we got AD 70, scattered for nearly 2,000 years, 880 odd years. And all of a sudden, a skeleton starts to form. Oh, when did that happen? Well, the first Aliyah begins to Palestine. 1882, some Jews around the world said, you know what, I've had enough of where I'm living. I want to go back to my own ancient territory where I used to live in biblical times. Very small amount of Jews indeed, but some of them did. So there's a little gathering of weight, if you like, starting to move towards having Israel as a homeland, but it wasn't real successful. Then in 1897, a man by the name of Theodore Herzl, an extremely famous Jewish man who lived in Europe at the time, he started a movement called the Zionist movement. And I'm sure you've heard of the term Zionist. If you call someone a Zionist today, it's generally you do so to belittle them or to perhaps make fun of them, because Zionists today are really looked down upon. They believe that they are troublemakers in the world. Well, this man was a true Zionist in the term of that understanding that he wanted a homeland for the Jews, and that was Theodor Herzl in 1897. Then there was a great shaking, and boy, did something amazing happen in 1914, the First World War. Absolutely an amazing thing happened that helped pave the way for the Jews to come back to their homeland. Then all of a sudden there's sinew, there's some starting to be now, not just a skeleton, we're now starting to see a real formation of a body on the ground here. It's still not alive yet, but it's just forming. So there's a step-by-step process. And a sinew, we believe, was a Balfour Declaration, which was a show of support from England, from Britain, to allow the Jews to return home. It was an official political endorsement and a recommendation from the British government to allow the Jews to go home to Israel. How amazing that was, we'll show you that tonight if we've got time. Then in 1922, the League of Nations is the old term for the United Nations. In 1922, they made an unconfirmed mandate that the Jews could go home to Israel. Nothing really majorly happened. A few came, that's for sure. Then in 1947, after the Second World War, the United Nations had held a vote as to whether or not the Jews could come back or finally call Israel, Palestine as it was known, their homeland, and it was passed in the United Nations, and in May 1948, Israel declared themselves a nation once again. Breath was breathed in them. They finally become a nation. They finally stood up. They became a nation in 1948, and in 1967 they had one of the most amazing victories in their history, and in fact in the history of any nation on the planet, when back then there was 3.5 million Jews. In 1967 faced 100 million Arabs who were going to be determined to drive them into the Mediterranean, get rid of the Jews once and for all, and 3 million Jews held off 100 million Arabs, and not only held them off, they extended their territory 2.5 times. They extended their territory, they recaptured Jerusalem after 2,000 years of not controlling it. They became an exceeding great army. Did you know today that Israel has 7 million people? About the population, I guess, of New South Wales. Maybe New South Wales and Victoria, probably just New South Wales. 7 million people. Fits into Australia 367 times. It's a dot. It has the 4th most powerful army in the world after America, Russia, China, Israel. Figure that one out. And they have the most powerful air force in the world, bar none. Now, maybe not in numbers, but in expertise, the Jewish pilots are number 1 in the world by a long shot. They are an exceeding great army, as Ezekiel 37 said they'd become. A power to be reckoned with. But of course, you're going to see next week and the week after, their concerns are building up and up and up with their nearby neighbours and a bigger neighbour, not such a close neighbour, but someone that's very interested in controlling Israel, as Ezekiel tells us. So we've got this situation where all of these things have happened exactly as God said they would happen. And I know we're going through this fairly rapidly, but it's just to give you some insight into Bible prophecy. What we'll do now is just hone in a little bit on this little section here, because can anyone remember what I said was the definition of Bible prophecy? Mould into which history is being poured. Well, something quite amazing happened back here, where some Jewish Zionists, Herzl included, unintentionally were about to break the mould that God had created for Israel. And an amazing thing happened. I'm going to show you that, and I think you'll find this quite fascinating. So as Caleb said, Bible prophecy is the mould into which history is being poured. God's created the mould. History goes into that mould. It can't go outside that mould. And if you dare try to break God's mould, you can rest assured that God will never ever allow that to happen. Let me just tell you a little story about this man, Theodore Herzl. Quite an amazing character. A fiery Jew. Most Jews are fairly fiery if you really want to, get to know them. They're very successful and they're extremely bright and very capable. This man was no exception. He was a Zionist. He formed the Zionist movement. He wanted Israel as a homeland. He went to Israel on numerous occasions. He went to the British to ask if they could have some helping, lending hand to get Israel as their homeland. Britain couldn't do a thing. They had no control over Israel, which was known as Palestine then. And time again, the British would say, "You're wasting your time talking to us. Turkey has control of Palestine." He couldn't get anywhere with the Turks. No way in the world could Turkey would ever even consider giving Israel to the Zionist movement. So he felt trapped. He felt as though he wasn't going down the track he wanted to go down. So he switched camps. He and 3 of his men did something quite amazing. But before we do that, you see that quote on the screen there? Page 638, Jeremiah. Come and colour it in your Bible. In Jeremiah chapter 16. Very amazing quotation, because how was God going to get Israel back to the land? How was he going to form the skeleton again? How was it all going to happen? Well, I've got verse 16 of Jeremiah 16 coloured in my Bible. If you haven't, you should colour it in, because it is a very good verse, a very powerful verse, one that has got a lot of meaning. Jeremiah 16, verse 16 says this. This is how God's going to get Israel, the Jews, back to their land. By the way, there wasn't many that really wanted to come back, because they were doing pretty good. When I'm talking now in the 1900s, the Jews were a fairly wealthy movement, especially in Europe, extraordinarily. They're not going to go back to a dust bowl. They're not going to listen to Theodore Herzl. Behold, he says, I will send for many fishers, and they will fish them back to the land. Let's just stop there for a moment. Theodore Herzl was probably the greatest of all the fishers. All right, now when you go fishing, you've got to put attractive bait on your hook. All right, it's no point in putting a bit of seaweed on your hook. You're not going to catch a fish with a bit of seaweed. All right, yeah, Jono, you're a good fisherman. The bait's got to be succulent and juicy and a nice big cockle if you want to go for King George whiting, or maybe a nice fish head or whatever. I don't know what snapper bite on these days. Lynn, you'd know. Snapper, what do they bite on? Fish heads or pilchards, there you go. Put one of those on. Whatever it is, it's got to look good. And you dangle it over the edge and you wait for the fish to go, wow, that looks pretty nice. So that's what God said, I'm going to send fishermen to try and fish you back. But guess what? The bait wasn't real attractive. Who wants to go back to a dust bowl? Because that's all Israel was. Palestine then. Because the Turkish government, in their infinite wisdom, had been running out of money for quite some time. Don't forget, the Ottoman Turk Empire was a pretty powerful organisation back in the 1600s. They had their own little empire. It wasn't a world empire, but they had their own empire, and they became quite a substantial little kingdom in their own right, and they controlled Palestine. Well, it got into the 1800s, the early 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, and the government was running out of money. So what they did in their wisdom, as you would, if you've got a tree in your house and you want to enjoy that tree, that's great, but everyone that's got a tree has to pay a tax on the tree. All right? So if you've got a tree in the front of your garden, in front of your house, our tax collectors will go around, count how many trees and present you with a bill because you've got to pay tax on a tree. So all the people in Palestine cut their trees down, dug them out, didn't want to pay tax. So Palestine, which was predominantly a lot of it desert anyway, what wasn't desert became absolute desert. Terrible. So here is this dust bowl that Theodore Herzl's put on a hook as a fisherman, that God says, I'll raise up these fishermen, I'll throw out the bait, they'll throw out the bait and here he is trying to throw out the bait to say, come on, let's see if we can go back to our ancient homeland. Jews aren't going to bite on that, are they? Because it's a dust bowl, and they're living very comfortably, particularly in Europe, thank you very much, because of their brilliance with particularly finances. They were able to get themselves into a very high living status quo, that's for sure. But the time came when Theodor Herzl had had enough, and he wasn't getting anywhere. And the British said to him, look, we understand the passion you have. We understand what you want to do. We can't help you, but what we can do is we can give you Uganda. Now, the Brits had control of Uganda in the 1800s, right through to a certain time period when Uganda seceded from the British Empire and became their own people, like Britain had control of a lot of nations in Africa. One of them was Uganda. And they said, you know what, we need some caretakers of that country. We know you'll do a good job, so we'll give you Uganda. He went back to his two mates, two very powerful lobbyists in the Zionist movement. And that's them there. One was Nahum Sirkin and Israel Zangwill. Both, they always look quite odd, don't they, in those days? Is it just me, or is it when they take photos, no one's allowed to smile and you look real dorky? But anyway, there they are, especially that guy on the right there. They were powerful lobbyists. And they sat down around the table and they said, we're never going to get Palestine. They obviously didn't read their Bible. We're never going to get that as a homeland. We've got to get somewhere, and Uganda is an extremely fertile country. Let's go for it. And they agreed. Some people, some of the Zionist movement, and we'll talk about one of those probably just in a few minutes, and then we'll end. Some of them decided that, these three decided that's the way they're going to go. Some didn't like that at all. There was a bitter, vicious debate, but these three got their way. They were so close to signing a deal with Britain that if they had have, this is where Israel would have been today. All right, this is the Uganda policy of 1904. This is where Israel would have been today had they signed off on this particular policy. Right smack bang there in the middle of Africa. That's where Israel would have been. By the way, you might be interested to know, and you can look this up in your own history books, one of the other little areas that they had considered giving Israel as a homeland was the top part of Western Australia. Did you know that? Could you imagine Israel being, divided off from the top part of Western Australia and have their little enclave as a nation up there with 200 million Muslims just north of them. Mind you, where they are now, they've got 250 million Muslims all the way around them, so it's not much better. But the point is, it would have been quite amazing for Australia to have little Israel stuck right in our country. But that was one of the areas that Britain was actually prepared to give Israel. But anyway, this was the one that won out. And these three men were ready, sign on the dotted line. Now, the problem with that is this. Ezekiel 37 says, I'll gather you into your homeland. All right, Bible prophecy is the mould into which history is being poured. These three men were about to break God's mould. They were about to snap it and to go somewhere else with Israel. Now, Bible students, and there were Christadelphians around when this was all developing, were looking at their Bibles and thinking, this is not going to happen. It cannot possibly happen because God says, I will bring you back into your homeland. Ezekiel 37. Let's have a look at it. You've got your Bibles there. Open it up. Verse 22. I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. Not Uganda. Not northwestern Australia. I will make you one nation upon the land, in the land of Israel. So these men here were going to, looks like, break God's mould. Would this fit God's mould? Well, we know it wouldn't. So how was God going to deal with it? You want to know how he dealt with it? Here it is. This is how he dealt with it. 1904. Three major lobbyists who were ready to sign off on the Uganda policy all died quite suddenly. And they weren't terribly old either. They all die. One, and Theodore Herzl, being the most vocal of the group, was only 44 when he dropped dead of a heart attack. If you try to break God's mould, he will intervene and he'll take you right off the scene quick smart. And he did. And therefore we're back on track. I will bring you into your own land. I will bring you into your own land on the mountains of Israel. And that's exactly what God ended up doing. And here's a little point which I'm going to probably close on. I did have a few more slides here, but I'm going to leave them till next week because it gets even better, the story. Don't you worry. But I'll tell you a little story about how it was that they ended up getting back to their homeland, or the stepping stones were put in the right direction. You'll find this quite interesting. A most amazing conversation took place between two men. It happened in a very plush hotel room. There was a British politician, was actually the Prime Minister at the time, called Lord Balfour. All right, he was Prime Minister of England, and a very eminent Jewish scientist. The conversation was to ensure that God's prophetic mould would be back on track, it wasn't going to be broken, and that Israel, or the Jews, would come back to their ancient homeland, their ancient territory. The two men were known simply as Lord Balfour. He was the Prime Minister in 1904 of England, and the other man was a man by the name of Cain Wiseman. He was the one that opposed Theodore Herzl about going to Uganda. He said, no, it can't be Uganda, it's got to be Israel or nowhere else. And of course he got howled down, and Theodore Herzl was able to get his way, and we know what happened next, as we showed on the previous slide. They were all taken off the scene very quickly. The point I want to make is this, that Cain Wiseman was a brilliant scientist. He was a Jew, obviously. He invented synthetic cobalt, which is a gunpowder. He was able to come up with the formula to be able to invent this synthetic cobalt, this gunpowder, acetone, I think it was also known as, and he was able to give it to the British military just in time while they were fighting their major wars in Africa. So they actually really owed this man quite something. They didn't really know what, but at least the Prime Minister said, well, I'll give him the time of day and we can have a meeting about this idea that he's wanting Israel. Now don't forget, this is 1904. The Brits do not control Israel. They do not control Palestine. The Turks have still got it. But Cain Wiseman simply wants the British support for Israel to be their homeland one day in the future, perhaps. So they're in the hotel room. And this is all in the autobiography of Cain Wiseman. He comes in, he's pretty nervous. He's actually very nervous because he's now about to speak on behalf of Jewry, that is all the Jews of Europe particularly, that were interested to see which way this was going to develop. Mind you, no one was still rushing to get back to Israel because it's a pretty dry land. So they get into the hotel room, they sit down, it's a plush hotel room. The Prime Minister says, now listen, Mr. Wiseman, I understand what you did for us. We're very grateful for what you were able to do in bringing to us this fantastic formula of being able to, make the synthetic cobalt so that we could continue fighting our wars in Africa. Cain Wiseman said, that's fine. I'm glad you've given me the time to have this conversation with you. It launched into almost not an argument, but I guess it was. It wasn't so much heated as it was animated. And Lord Balfour, with his typical British upper crust, stiff upper lip attitude, said, now listen, Mr. Wiseman, why don't you, like your predecessors, sign off on Uganda? We can give you Uganda. It is something that it's in our control to give you. Cain Wiseman said, no, we don't want Uganda. It's got to be our homeland, our ancient territory that we once had in biblical times. And Lord Balfour said, we don't control that. I cannot give you that. Why on earth would you want a dust bowl? It's an absolute arid place. Uganda is absolutely a beautiful country. It's fertile. It's rich in minerals. It's rich in resources. You can make something of it. You can bring your people back there. Sign off on Uganda. Don't go. Why do you want to go back to that dust bowl that you know as Israel? And Cain Wiseman thought for a moment and he said, Lord Balfour, Prime Minister, if I was to tell you that you could no longer have London as your capital for the British people, what would you think? Well, with that, there's an almighty laughter by Lord Balfour, and he stood up out of his chair, the record says, and he walked over to the window and he laughed and laughed and laughed and said, "Don't be daft, man. Don't be daft. London has been at the heart of the British people for 1,000 years." And you could just imagine him standing there with his, chest pumped out in pride. "London has been at the heart of the British people for 1,000 years." With that, he sat down, he made his point. And Cain Wiseman just leant forward on his chair, and he looked Lord Balfour in the eyes and said, "With all due respect, Prime Minister, Jerusalem has been at the heart of the Jewish people when London was a swamp." And that's all he said. And there was silence. I reckon you could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. It just made its point to Lord Balfour. And he took a big deep breath and, "Well, I can't help you anyway." And with that, the meeting was ended. That logged into Lord Balfour's mind. The war started within 10 years, First World War. The Brits invaded North Africa with General Allenby. They came across the Egyptian peninsula, across the Sinai Peninsula. They came up into Palestine, and when a shot was not even fired, they entered into Jerusalem. They pushed the Turks out, and the Brits took control of Israel, Palestine, for the first time in the First World War. And Lord Balfour, 3 years later, when the war ended in 1917, he was no longer Prime Minister, he was Foreign Minister. He remembered the conversation he had many years before, and he wrote up what is now known as the very famous Balfour Declaration, which said this in 1917: "His Majesty's Government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for Jewish people. God rules in the kingdom of men. He makes the mould, he makes it all happen," and it did happen. The Brits got control of Palestine in 1904. They never thought they'd ever even see control of that. They did get control of it, and as a result of that, the Balfour Declaration paved the way for the Jews to start coming home. We're only starting to see the skeleton form. We're only starting to see it all slowly come together. Next week, God willing, this isn't going to get the Jews back to the land, but God said in Jeremiah, if you watch that rest of that verse, he said, "Hunters will come and will hunt you back to Israel." There hasn't been any greater hunters in Israel's history than the people we're going to deal with very briefly next week, because I don't want to dwell on it. But we know the hunters came in the form of Nazi Germany, and they hunted the Jews out of every corner of Europe to the point where they had nowhere else to go but back home. I'll send fishers, Theodore Herzl, Zionist movement, Cain Wiseman. They tried, the bait wasn't quite attractive enough, but then I'm going to send hunters. And hunters will come and they'll get you back to that land. So we're going to be dealing with that next week. We're probably going to leave it at that. I don't think there's anything more I want to deal with tonight. There is probably a few more slides I could deal with, but I'll leave them till next week. And we've got a really interesting little video clip to show you next week, so please make sure you come along. It's a fascinating one about Israel. It'll show you just how successful they are on the world stage. Quite amazing, to say the least. They really are. Now, is there any questions? If not, we can have supper and answer any questions. But we've sort of gone through a bit of information tonight, but it gets even better next week. And even the week after, when you start dealing with other nations that we can see from the Bible is wanting to certainly destroy Israel. All right, if you just remain